Hey, podcast people, John here. You're listening to bonus episode number 13 of Make Moves. In this episode, I'm going to share a few key takeaways that I learned from each of season one's guests. Unlike all of the other episodes, I'm answering questions, not asking them here in this episode. Old friend and loyal listener Robert suggested that I bring in a guest host to interview me to do the season wrap-up. So that's what I did. My pal Laura is going to be the host. You might be asking yourself, how exactly does one become qualified to be a guest host on Make Moves? Well, I'll tell you. Laura's always been nice to me. Laura had a radio show in college, and Laura said she would do it. So Laura's qualified. She got the job. All right. No need to beat around the bush. Let's just get on with it here. I'll check in about the halfway point to play some music for you, and I'll share a few closing thoughts at the end. All right. Here we go. Enjoy your listening. 2, 3, 4.
Hello, this is Laura, and you're listening to Make Moves. We're here with John, who's usually your host on Make Moves, but today he's going to be our guest. Hi, John.
Hey, Laura. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
My life is groovy.
Excellent. Well, it should be good, right? You're wrapping your first season of Make Moves, and this is our recap podcast, correct?
Yeah, correct. Can you believe it? A whole season?
A whole season. I feel like this was in its infancy, and now all of a sudden it's like heading off to college.
Yeah. It's kind of mind blowing. I made a little video just the other day, and I got some stats, and it's been downloaded thousands and thousands of times in 25 countries, actually more than 25 countries around the globe.
Nice. You've gone international.
Isn't that nuts?
It is nuts. I always thought of you as a continental sort, and now we have the proof.
I'm a continental breakfast sort, maybe.
Yeah. A pastry and a glass of orange juice. What could be better?
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking some time to talk with me today.
Oh, it's really, truly my pleasure. I have been a fan of Make Moves for this last season and a fan of yours for the last 14 or so years that we've known each other. So this is really exciting for me to participate in one of your life passions, which is this podcast.
Well, I'm glad you're here.
Well, John, I think what we'd love to know, myself and the other listeners out there, is what you learned over this last season about the people that you talked with, and what did you take away from this experience of doing a podcast?
Oh, yeah. Well, I learned a lot of personal things, and I learned a lot of things about, the guests themselves. Would it be, can we go through it episode by episode, and maybe we could talk about what I learned about each person and what I took away from it. And then I don't know if there's some big closing deep thoughts at the end. I'll be happy to share them, but we have to get that far. Would that be an okay approach for you?
I think that'd be great. You're reading my mind. Oh,
excellent. Well, yeah, I guess the show started with episode 1 and I've told people a few times, I started this, I did the first bit of recording on a borrowed microphone in front of a donut shop sitting in my car while I was hijacking Wi-Fi. And then fast forward a few weeks, I was doing episode 1 with Louis Marks from Ropeadope Records. And, I was a little nervous to do it. It was my first time. We had a few jokes about, is this your first time? And, but
very good. Yeah.
He was such a great guest because, there's so much to learn about him and the music business. I encourage everyone to check out that episode, but a few things stuck out to me, as a person and as someone who's in business. He has this interesting way of just not waiting for answers. If there's questions, sometimes he just does things. And, that's in line with the Make Moves philosophy. But I felt really privileged to talk to a guy who was just doing that.
Right.
Excuse me. And he also built a record company around music, but trust and community. And I was really impressed with how he leaves so much creative direction and discretion up to the musicians, because they know about music. And I don't know, as I was, thinking about my own podcast, I learned that just doing things is part of it. And sometimes when I don't have answers, I just have to trust the other people who do have the answers. And that was a really big lesson for me.
Yeah. And do you know where he got the name Ropeadope? Because it's about boxing, right? And you're trying to kind of tire out your opponent in the process. So how do you think that plays a part in his creative work?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. It is a reference to boxing. I don't know the whole story on how that got settled on, but that is it seemed to me part of his approach to running a business. He's not a major music label in the sense that he's got, hundreds and thousands of people working for him. Ropeadope is a small shop. It's just that they seem to do things by, one, being a few steps ahead of everybody else. And, in a lot of ways, he lets the big lumbering giants tire themselves out by doing things that don't work.
Right.
Which I thought was who knew that would be the best approach? It's just let them get tired and find out what doesn't work. And then he does new things that just seem to work out.
Right. So sometimes about making moves is to allow things to unfold and then be creatively responsive to the things that work. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, now that I think about it with you here, it's sort of another deep lesson. Lewis was really interesting to talk to. In episode 2, I talked with this photographer, Richard Ross. A few takeaways that just, thinking about it, he has this real sense of social purpose in his art. I've met a lot of artists, and some of them are very, very talented, but a lot of it seems to be about the medium or the expression, or so. There's a lot of self in the art. And I thought it was really interesting with Richard that, he's really, I guess he's had a long career and he had time to put himself at the center of the art. But at this point in his life, he's really trying to accomplish something with his photographs and his work with sort of the, reworking of the juvenile justice system. And that just kind of blew me away. Did you hear all that episode?
I did. And, I've had the privilege too, since I know you, and I've heard Richard speak, in person and talk about his work. So it is really phenomenal to think about what he's doing to bring awareness to really a forgotten group of people who really didn't, are too young to even know or to give up. To give up at this point, and to have an advocate and to have someone who's willing to sincerely document their experience is really just incredible, and also so humane.
Yeah. It sort of blew. As I was talking with him, and since I've thought about it since, it's sort of amazing that he was this willingness to take risks and put himself on the line in order to give voice to others. That sort of blew my mind. Like, I think a lot of artists and musicians are always trying to find their voice. And he was basically saying, I know how to take a picture, and how does that help you have voice? And
right.
That it was just, I don't know, it was something refreshing. The other thing that blew me away about him, and I don't know if anyone else out there listening caught on to this. He has this sense of exuberance and this work ethic, which is just, it's unbelievable. The guy is decades older than I am. He never sleeps. He goes all the time. He is just driven still to this day. And, there's a lot to learn about making moves there. You just wake up and do things, and he does it every single day. He's got a system, a method to his madness, and some strategic thought, but every day he gets up and grinds away at it. And I learned that by visiting his office. I thought I was going to go visit an art studio or a photo studio, and there's pictures and things, but everyone in the office is, doing research online about policies or grant opportunities to fund new work, there's just so much, thoughtful machinery behind doing the art, and he just gets up every day and works at it. Even not the sexy parts, he works at all of it.
Right. Well, and it really speaks to the power of visual culture to influence things like policy and, societal perception and things that, we don't always associate with looking at a photograph. But, photographs change things on a really large scale that, in the making of it, you don't necessarily know that that's going to happen. But in the application of it and the exposure and the commitment of the artist, it can really reach far beyond just that visual piece. So that's great. That's great that he's doing it in that way. So he's making lots of kinds of moves, right? He's being creative, but he's also applying the creativity to social change.
Yeah, and what else is interesting about him is he's totally irreverent about what type of medium he uses. If a photograph isn't it, he'll do a play. And if the play doesn't work, he'll write a children's book. And if the children's book doesn't work, he'll make something out of wood. He'll do whatever it takes. He has a skill set, and he knows how to do certain things. And the things he doesn't know how to do, he just figures out. He goes in the office and figures out how to do the next thing. I don't know. I find that pretty interesting. When I got into episode 3 with Peter Harris, he's the founder of Resonate Streaming Media. There's sort of like he describes it as if how did he say it? If Spotify was cooperatively owned and all the musicians got paid for their work or something like that, it's sort of the ethical version of streaming media. I thought it was interesting. I was surprised at how densely packed his company's mantra of stream to own, how pregnant that was with good intentions to support artists. Streaming to own is part of a business model, but it's a business model that really has artists at the center of the circle. And the reason you stream to own is because there's small transactions that take place every time you listen, and every single play of a song supports an artist. And I thought that was sort of a neat thing. And I think the algorithms, he described it as, they're not designed just to make money. They're designed to mimic the process of falling in love with music. And I just thought that was so deep to me.
That is really insightful, and both insightful and commercial. It's sort of really at the nexus of those two things, and really fascinating, right? Because it takes sort of the human experience of listening to music and becoming, your anthem or your soundtrack or your favorite album, and allowing artists to reap the benefit of that in this streaming culture, because people just don't buy albums or go to shows or do things in the same way anymore.
Yeah. I don't know. I was really impressed with his model and his philosophy and his hope to really impact a large community of people, namely independent musicians. Actually, that was one of the other things that really stuck out to me about his interview is, he knew when he started that he was tackling something big on behalf of a lot of musicians and a lot of people and a lot of fans. He knew it was a big need and it was going to be a big solution. And I thought it was really neat. He mentioned somewhere in the interview, he wasn't sure if he was delusional or crazy when he started. He was wondering, am I insane for trying to do this? And again, I think that's sort of a make moves philosophy. Sometimes big things require you to go out of your comfort zone and maybe even, if not feel insane, be a little insane. And I thought that was I was surprised he shared it. It was really personal, but I'm glad he shared it, because for listeners out there who are thinking of doing something on their own, I'm not encouraging you to act insane, but
within reason.
Yeah.
Insane within reason.
Yeah, but it was sort of an impressive admission that sometimes you just feel a little bit nuts when you're tackling something that big. And I thought it was cool because when I first met him, he was trying to figure out how blockchain worked because he wanted to apply it to the music industry, this blockchain technology of encoding information. And then a few months later, he was an international expert giving talks about blockchain technology in music. And now his company has been launched and they are using blockchain technology in music. And that's just one of those things. I mean, he wasn't waiting for someone to tell him how to do it. There was no path. He just did it. And now he's the expert. And that happened
right.
in the span of time that I've known him.
That's, incredible and really exemplary, right, of the things that I've heard you say about Make Moves, which, if you were to kind of connect the thread between all of your guests this last season for season 1, it is a group of people who assumed that things were possible and didn't necessarily need the evidence base to make those things happen. They are creating the evidence base. They're citation number 1.
Yeah, right. I like that. Citation number 1. Yeah, they're the people that everyone else will look back to and figure out, how did they invent the model? Yeah, I agree with you a lot. That's an interesting way of putting it. In episode 4, I talked with, actually, he's one of my musical heroes, Charlie Hunter, and he did the same thing. He invented this instrument that no one else had played before. There was no roadmap for it. He just invented it because he thought he could, and he became a monstrous musician. And there was no book at the music store about how to play this 8-string instrument that he came up with. Although now he's playing a 7-string instrument, but that's not really the point. He just decided that I don't even know if he knew it was possible. He just did it. I don't even know if they know it's possible or they think it's possible or assume. Sometimes they just do it and it makes it possible.
Well, and what do you think, what other factors contribute to what helps these individuals succeed? Because that's something that you're talking to them and, obviously in their path, they've had setbacks or uncertainty, but in your time with them, they're likely talking about something that they had success with. So what do you think's behind that? Were there any themes that came through around what supports them and enables them?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that. And I don't know if I have exactly the right answer, but they all have a support network of people around them, which I thought was, it was obvious to me because I grew up in a musical family and, I knew that, risk takers and creative people, musicians, artists, they're not born in a vacuum. They have husbands and wives and kids and friends and colleagues and whatnot. And, they really do rely on those people for support. But as far as what allows some of these people to do things that have never been done before, I don't want to say it's innate, but they all had this sort of thought process or temperament where they just did it. And at first I thought that was like something you had to be born with. And as I'm getting deeper into this podcast, I didn't know anything about podcasts when I started. You can actually adopt that process whenever you want. You can be that person who just decides to do something.
Right.
Yeah,
and the success is perhaps just in the doing, in the process, and it's a reframing in many ways of what success is.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Well, yeah, actually of something I've recently, well, how can I say this? I have lots of younger people in my life. I've got kids and the kids all have friends and everything. And I'm not a big fan of giving advice to kids because I don't really have all the best advice and I don't have all the answers. But one thing I have taken to saying is whatever you do in life, start and finish more projects no matter how they turn out. That's my simple advice for growing up. And that's something that I've learned from a lot of these people. And some of them failed terribly a few times through. A lot of the guests that I spoke with did not land on their feet the first time, but they just start and finish projects and learn and keep going. And they are people who, for whatever reason, have decided that they can just do things. And that's encouraged me to decide that I can just do things. And I hope it'll encourage lots of people to just decide they can do things. And also, of course, please remember, people out there, that, they don't do it alone. They do have a support network, and sometimes they have to support a network. So it's important to, really respect and honor the people who are taking the moves and doing what they need to do. Something else I found out before I derail on this deep topic too long, it was really cool to meet one of my heroes, my musical heroes, Charlie Hunter, and he wasn't a dick.
Right.
He was just such a nice human guy.
It's so reassuring in the way that you don't necessarily expect, and you kind of prepare yourself for disappointment. And then when you resonate or feel like this person is really a gem of a human being, you're like, wow, not only is this person great, but I also have great instinctual taste on people. This is fantastic. Everyone wins.
Yeah.
So that's good.
It was really neat. He was one of my very first interviews. I think the first, he was number 4. I hadn't had a whole lot of experience doing it. And I was a little awestruck by the guy, and I was doing kind of a bad job of interviewing him, I felt like, but he was just so humble. He kind of carried it for me. He was just such a nice guy that he helped that interview be better, because I think maybe he knew that I wasn't going to be able to pull it off without his support. So yeah, he was a super cool guy. In episode 5, I talked with this guy named Tilden Yamamoto, who runs Tilden Shop. I think you told me you had listened to that episode.
It's one of my favorites, I have to admit. I just love the way the two of you interact through the podcast, and Tilden just felt so personally accessible to me, and I just loved especially his ethos around fashion and clothing and creating that, and kind of I almost want to call it the uniform approach. And it's not because it's standard. It's not in that way, but that clothing can be a really expressive uniform. And I just loved all of that about Tilden. Yeah,
he's got there's like a real big philosophy and sense of purpose behind what he's doing. And I found it kind of enlightening. I don't know anything about fashion. Ask anyone who knows me. I'm always wearing mismatched plaids or something. But, I was surprised that, one, he was so accessible. He took the time to explain to me things about fashion and the purpose behind clothing that I had never really thought about. They're really sort of deep thoughts on, not needing everything, needing good garments, needing, good staple pieces of clothing, things that you love that fit you perfect, and not needing everything else. I thought that was really sort of just a different approach to thinking about how to build a wardrobe or how to make clothes. And I was really knocked out by, he actually sent me some clothes and I got to inspect them up close and personal. I love that he focuses on these details that nobody else ever sees. I mean, there's this pride in craftsmanship. You could turn the clothes inside out and there's not a missed stitch. Everything is beautiful. Even the stuff that only he knows is in there, and the person who owns the clothes would know that's in there. I just thought that was so cool. I mean, it's like you're wearing a secret.
Right. And that is for the intimacy of that. It's for the wearer, not necessarily for the seer, the person who's seeing you in the clothes, but really for the person who's making them and owning them. And that's in some ways a very small impact group, right?
Yeah.
But he believes that is valuable, and it actually wouldn't do it another way.
Yeah, I mean, he spends countless hours at a vintage single needle sewing machine making these clothes perfect, and he puts these details on that 2 people in the world know about, him and the person who gets the clothes in the mail. That's it. And there is some kind of weird intimate connection between, the person wearing the clothes and the person who made the clothes. I don't know. I agree with you. And, something else that was really interesting about him is he had this old world craftsmanship approach, but he also runs this really lean business on Instagram. I thought that was
right.
that was so neat to me, that he really is steeped in this old way of thinking about quality and artistic merit. And also at the same time, he just takes advantage of all kinds of resources like social media to be a storefront. That was so cool to me. Do other people do that? I don't really know about fashion, but he seems like sort of an anomaly in that.
Well, and maybe not, in terms of fashion, I'm guessing that other people do this. But I also found Tilden in many ways, like a lot of your guests this season, but I guess Tilden spoke to me specifically, he's really a creative entrepreneur, and there's so much now being written and being devised in curriculum, in art schools and maker spaces and, through Etsy and various other, mechanisms to really, launch and support creative entrepreneurship. I mean, the city of San Jose actually has a whole plan to support and bring creative entrepreneurs into the city and weave them into the life of the city. And it's great that Tilden represents in many ways, like you said, this old world way of crafting, but using technology and tools to give himself an audience and a commercial base, but that doesn't require him having a literal storefront or, a manufacturing facility or, some of these larger costs of fashion production. So it's a great model, and to see someone doing it so happily, I think is extra reassuring.
Yeah. And he does seem so happy. He seems unfazed by all of the things that would scare me about trying to do that. He's happy to do it.
It's fantastic.
Episode 6, I talked with Fred Toy, the TV and film director. He, speaking of just being happy, it blew me away. There's so much joy for him in what he does. I mean, he's kind of like a super big deal. I didn't realize that when I met him. I bumped into him at a pizza shop in town, and we got to talking. And then, I basically said, I've started this podcast. Will you come talk? I didn't really know that he was kind of a real mover and shaker in his field. But as I got to talk with him and learn more about him, I was expecting sort of some pretense about, this is what a major industry guy would be like. And he just loves what he does.
Yeah. And you have your mechanism. This is what I loved about talking with you about the podcast, is that in some ways you were inspired to do this because you wanted to manufacture a reason to get to know people. And that happened especially with this guest. You bumped into him, and instead of saying, hey, we're hitting it off, let's go get a drink, you said, hey, we're hitting it off, let's go do a podcast. Yeah.
I have more thoughts on Fred, but you're hitting on something that, maybe a lot of people out there don't know this. I really have always been curious about other people and what makes them tick. And I've actually had and lost friends because I ask questions. It seems sort of inappropriate because I want to know about them. And I guess, in the sort of the social routine of things, a lot of times the questions that I want to know, they don't get asked. And when you do ask people at a dinner party, so what makes you feel like you're vulnerable? Like, they don't want to talk about it. But
they're like, well, let's wait till the end of the evening and see how.
Yeah. And somehow,
how honest you get.
Yeah, somehow I feel like the outcast and I've done something wrong in social settings. But for me, having a podcast, it's this great opportunity because for some reason it's acceptable to ask these things and people don't mind sharing. And for me, it's been great because, Fred in episode 6, he's a super deep guy and he's wonderful. And if I if I would have asked him any of that stuff, maybe out of the context of an interview or something, he might have thought I was a little bit nuts. But anyway, he was so willing to share information. He told me this funny story about sort of the wisdom and the power of letting go of a plan, which has been something that I've taken with me. I mean, right after he told me about that, it's sunk into my mind. So he produces, he directs these big shows and films, and he'll literally have like 100 people working for him, and they're burning a lot of money as everyone's getting paid to work. And he goes in with a plan about how a scene's supposed to happen, and sometimes he just abandons the plan because he knows there's magic in the moment. And for me, running a podcast, I answered my first handful of interviews with sort of questions and a structure in mind that I wanted to get to. And right after I spoke with him, I realized it was okay to take a little bit of risk and just follow the conversation and see what happens. It's okay to abandon the plan. There's probably something good there.
Right. And if he can do it on the scale that he's operating on, then even though it's a risk to take for your scale, it was also freeing in a way, right? To hear from him, listen, you can do this. You can respond to the moment and abandon the plan. And just, in some ways having that permission from someone who does it, makes it work, and perhaps maybe does it with a slightly larger risk factor is awesome.
Yeah.
Because you're learning things from these folks as you go.
Yeah.
It's not just about collecting static information from them in the interview, but each interview is kind of feeding into the next and informing the next.
Yeah, they are stacking on each other, and the knowledge is accruing somewhere, I think, in my mind. And for me, aside from wanting an excuse to talk to people, the other thing that I've really tried to do in this podcast is answer questions that I've had and, learn things that I think I need to know just by having the opportunity to ask an expert. And for me, that's been so valuable. I don't know why I didn't do this. Well, I was going to say 20 years ago. That's because podcasts didn't exist 20 years ago. But, I don't know why it took me this long to figure out that this is a real way of sort of poking around the world and learning the things that you need to learn. So, yeah, it's been great. It's one last thing that Fred told me. I wouldn't want to leave the conversation about him without mentioning it, is that he said something, I'm going to have to paraphrase, but he said something like, if you really love telling stories, just go ahead and do it. And it will just create opportunities for you by doing it. And he said it might not be the opportunities you wanted or the ones you expected, but if you just do things, doors will open. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, that's actually the crux of the advice that I give the young kids now. Just start and finish more things and move on, because some opportunity will come out of that.
Right. And that it's not always about, it's about accepting, right? And not always controlling. And I think that's an interesting lesson that has certainly taken me a long time to understand, and fostering that for people as early as possible seems like something I wish, again, I knew or could believe years ago.
Yeah.
So thank you, Fred.
Yeah, Fred, wherever you are, thank you. Actually, I think he's on set filming Westworld right now in Canada somewhere. In episode 7, I talked with Alex Sheshinoff, who wrote this really amazing book about basically giving up his New York dream to chase some different version of paradise. He was he had his own startup, and he was voted as one of the most successful young guys in New York. And he basically just decided, I hate this and I don't want to do it anymore. I don't know if hate was the word. He said, I don't want to do this anymore. And, for him, he just took this huge risk. He sort of cashed out of a sort of a safe pattern, a safe, predictable outcome to go do the unknown. And it was a sort of a sense of bravery that I commandeered from him. And also, I loved how understated he was. He's accomplished so much in his life. He's done startups. He's been an influential guy, has a huge education, written books for, he's got publications out with, in all kinds of high profile places, but he was just so understated. He never really put it in my face. He was just this sort of free, mischievous, curious dude. And I read his book, and it was a fast and easy read, but it just made such a big impact on me. And actually, in a lot of ways, it encouraged me when I needed it, because I was sort of tearing down a different path and taking some risks myself with this podcast. And for whatever reason, that book came at the right time. All right. With the permission of our friends over at Ropeadope Records, we're listening to a little bit of the title cut off of Michael Blake's new album, Red Hook Soul. It is a killer album with a lot of great musicians playing on it. I don't know about you, but this makes me so happy. Take a little listen. I dare you not to smile. In episode 8, I talked with Jason Verlinde. He was the publisher of the Fretboard Journal. Something I took away from him is he kind of felt out of place in his corporate world job, which seems to be, I've heard that a few times now. But he said, I think I'm just going to invent this niche magazine from scratch. He just took a leap of faith, and he started this magazine that's all about the culture and the community of guitar players and fretted instrument players. And it kind of blew my mind, because once upon a time, I love music and guitars and people who make guitars and whatnot. I always wondered, how do people wind up with jobs like publisher of Fretboard Journal? And when I dug a little deeper, I realized that they invent Fretboard Journal, and that's how they wind up being the publisher. Well, right. I think he did it with a friend, and that, for me, that was just sort of a great lesson. Maybe I'll do something like that with a podcast. And the other thing that I thought was neat is he invented a publication, but he built a community around it. It's not just pictures in a magazine. And that for me was, sort of a healthy lesson. And I've tried to do that with this show. All the people on the Facebook and the Instagram checking in, sending emails. It's really about the people that we get to connect with, not just the product of a podcast or a magazine or whatever it is you're working on. So that was really helpful for me to think through.
Right. And I think I've heard, it sounds like in many ways, Jason and all of your guests on Make Moves have done this thing that I've heard you say, which is, normal people can do commendable things. This is about kind of breaking down this notion that creatives are kind of relying on this 1 in a million chance to make it big, and that they're individuals that kind of work in a vacuum, and they're just fueled by a singular passion that, starts at birth.
Yeah.
That this is not about that. This is about demystifying that and kind of taking that notion and really pushing it aside.
Yeah. And, so I'm by most measures, just a pretty normal, regular guy. And it's important for me to know that a lot of these people that are out there doing amazing things are basically normal people. They might do things or take risks or decide that something is possible, but they are not really different than you or me most of the time. I did interview one person this season who might be different than everybody else, but I'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, I'm glad that you picked up on that thought process there, because that's important to me. I think there's a lot of people out there in the world who haven't really embraced the fact that they can do something amazing, and because they feel like they're just normal. And if this in any way encourages anyone to realize that, yeah, normal people could do pretty awesome stuff, that would be okay with me. That would make me really happy.
Yeah.
In episode 9, I talked with Leela Sid, the food photographer and author of Food with Friends. She was actually the only female to appear in season 1. I invited a few others, but I think I made them mad. I probably have to work on my interpersonal relations with females.
They just couldn't put up with it. They just couldn't.
I don't know. So thank you for rounding out the season here with the female presence. But
happy to.
Yeah, I
always like to represent.
I tried, and I think I'm going to do better in season 2. But anyway, Leela was brave enough. She came on, and she is also a normal person. She shared, some of the human parts of her and the things that didn't go right in her life as well. But she had this just relentless work ethic, I think is how she explained it. And it just amazed me. She's a sort of a young to middle-aged woman, and she will not take no for an answer. She found this niche that she liked in food photography and lifestyle blogging and whatnot. And she threw herself into it completely. I mean, I guess she was young enough where she didn't have too many responsibilities like kids and whatnot that she had to worry about, other people to take care of. But when she was able, she threw herself completely into a path, or maybe I should say she created a path through blogging and social media to get where she wanted to be. And wherever it was that she wanted to be, I don't think it even existed before she set out to get there. I don't think there were food photographers and food bloggers when she started all of this, or maybe fewer of them. She invented there where she was going, and she got there just by starting. And right. I don't think she could have planned it moving forward. It only makes sense going backwards. And I don't know. I found that kind of inspiring. I mean, I think there's a better path to how to start a podcast than, invent a niche in food photography. But there was a lesson there for me, and I'm glad that she shared it with me. And the other thing that I really liked about her was her cookbook, which, by the way, has interesting recipes and is very delicious to look at. It's really about the art of being together with friends around food. And I just love that social theme there. It's not about it's partially about the food, but it's also about interacting with people you care about around food. And that to me was just a really cool thing. And that's something I'm trying to remember. And actually, when I've had some friends ask me about how do you podcast and what do you do, and some of it is about technical things like a microphone or headphones or whatever, but a lot of it is for me is about how do you connect with people and an audience, and how do you build connections with people by doing this. It's less about the picture or the piece of food that's there when you're done.
Right. And it's another nod to this, theme of Make Moves, which is creating within community and creating to enhance community, and to see her have this very personal path that is, connected back to friends. You know, I have a passion. It's for food. It's for food photography. But it's also is equally connected to my circle. And then I did see, I think you posted something where her book won an award, right? I mean, so her community of food people acknowledged her. I think was it like through Food 52 maybe, or she won. I can't remember what the award is called.
Yeah.
I feel like Piggy is in my mind. It's like a,
I forget exactly what it's called, but it's like the Academy Awards for food books, and she got it. And, you know, I don't know, that to me, well, I'm happy for one, but it's so interesting. Well, that there's a community out there of people who care, you know, I mean, they're all into it, and she's connected with them and brings people together through her work. And that to me that's awesome. That's what it's about.
It's the Food 52, the Piglet.
The Piglet, yeah.
The Piglet Tournament of Cookbooks.
Yeah. I didn't even know there was a tournament of cookbooks. There's a lot of things I didn't know before starting this podcast, but when people give you license to ask questions and investigate, it's fun, the things you can find. I talked with, in episode 10, a guy named Pete Muller. So he might be one of the guys who's a little bit different than everyone else. He is, I think his brain's ticking on maybe a slightly different level. You know, he's an incredible athlete, musician. He is sort of a mathematician, computer programmer, quantitative analyst. The guy he's accomplished a lot. Actually, it was sort of, I wasn't sure what to expect when I met him, and, you know, accomplishing what he has accomplished, he could have very easily been an absolute jerk and been able to back it up, but he was just such a nice guy, and he just is really smart, has a lot of drive and a lot of talent. And for me, I learned a lesson there, which is, even if you don't really know what it is you expect you're going to find in somebody else, sometimes you have these presuppositions, and sometimes you need to let those go too. You know, I knew I wasn't sure who he would be or what he was all about, but I think I had a hunch that maybe he would be a certain way, and he just wasn't. He was way more approachable and human. And again, you know, he's you know, so he's a great musician. He's a you know, like a really serious surfer, and he is also one of the architects of quant hedge fund trading. You know, he's like sort of a luminary in that field, and that takes, from what I understand, a lot of smarts. He's kind of legendary. And, you know, he's, by all practical standards, succeeded at, I think, everything he's ever set his mind to. And yet still, he was just a normal, nice guy.
Right. A poet and a quant. Right? Isn't that the poet?
Yeah.
He's both, not either or. There you go.
Yeah, he's all of the above. And then when he's bored, right, he writes crossword puzzles. I mean, like that's just kind of how he is.
Right. He's going to stave off dementia till he's 150.
Yeah. He was interesting, and he was so open with me, which I wasn't sure if he would be, and he really was so open with me about the questions that I asked. And something that really stuck out to me is, you know, like I said, he's succeeded in life. He's done a lot, or however you define success, but he's done well. But even, you know, with a guy who has a lot of resources, which I think he does, he could do pretty much anything he wants at this point. I get that feeling. And yet he still seems to chase music like every other musician that I talk to. There was some kind of thing like, all of the resources in the world don't take away the fact that you just long to make better music. I thought that was so cool.
Right. And he performs. It's not like he does this in solitude, but he you know, he plays, he sings, he writes, and he performs, right? Yeah.
He performs regularly. He made like while he's running a hedge fund, he made a commitment to perform a few times a month. Whatever money gets made from music, I think he gives it all back to charity. He's not really doing it for that type of success. But, you know, he goes out there to do it. And I asked him, I said, you know, what makes you feel most vulnerable, or what's the biggest risk? And he basically said, I want to go out there and I want people to like it, and I want to be better at it is that what I'm doing, and I want to connect with people. And I thought, no matter where you are in this world, that seems to be some kind of a human universal. And of all the musicians I've spoken with, that comes up a lot. And so I guess life circumstance doesn't really erase that in any particular way. I don't know. I thought that was neat. I don't know if I did a good job describing it, but I thought it was a neat observation to make about him.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. In episode 11, I talked with Denny Tedesco, the producer of the great award-winning documentary film, The Wrecking Crew. He was great for me to talk with because we had a pretty similar life growing up. Although I'd never met him before the moment when I walked in to interview him. It's really rare for me to get a chance to chat with someone where I don't have to fill in all of the historical or contextual or cultural gaps of what it means to grow up in a musician's family. And we were able to just jump right into conversation that was, we had a connection there because we had a lot of shared understandings. And for me, just the comfort level of that was great. But, he also, some big things that really stuck out to me is he just had this idea. He really cared about, the history and the story of studio musicians in Los Angeles. They were important to him. I think, there's a reason his father was a famous studio musician in Los Angeles, but he wanted to capture this story. That was his idea. And even when everybody else told him that it couldn't be done, he just still did it. And he found new ways to get it done. And I don't know. I mean, he is also just a normal guy who would not give up. And I think at some points it may have been at personal expense. I think he maybe made some irrational financial decisions to get his movie done. I know it cost him a lot of time with his family. But he knew that it was important even when nobody else thought it was as important. And he knew it could be done even when no one else thought it could be done. He just would not let go. And right up until the moment where he's winning the awards for having this great documentary, he was crazy. Mm-hmm. And that, I don't know, there was something really just, I want to say heartwarming, but so there's some redeeming quality there, because I think a lot of people out there feel nuts when they have an idea. And it's hard not to listen to a lot of people who say it can't be done.
Right.
But, and that's something I'm trying to dig through in my life is, well, when should you not listen to the other people? Is it something about the idea that you're having that you can't give up, or is it that I just need to put less stock in what other people have to say? I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to balance that out yet, but it's something that went through my mind.
Well, and it's interesting too, because, part of what you're doing here with Make Moves is trying to understand people's creative risk-taking process. And you start to realize that what other people think could be really seen as a risk, right? And how do you want to deal with others' perceptions and opinions and feelings? And who do you still love, but who do you listen to, and who do you take care of, and how do you take care of yourself in all of this? And, it's... and
can you still love someone and not listen to them?
Right. Which hopefully is true, right? Probably a test of love, but a decent one and a necessary one. And also, I think it's great that you were able to spend time with him because you have a similar world, or you come from a similar world in which you're trying to make sense of, and to sit down with someone who you don't really know and have this shared experience or background that you can then make sense of together in your time together is really cool. It's such a neat connective experience.
Yeah, that came up with Denny a lot, and also in episode 12, Anthony Wilson, who's another Los Angeles-based musician who had a musical family, and It is. I mean, it is true. I mean, there's some deeper part of this. I mean, I have reasons for doing a podcast, and I have a sort of a mission in mind, an intention behind it. But a lot of it is still just me trying to figure out my own life. And it's been really interesting to talk with people out there who have different backgrounds. Some of them have similar backgrounds, and it's been a nice luxury to get a chance to ask them questions that, well, one, maybe no one else would ever have asked them because they didn't have that common connection. And two, I get to learn stuff that is really helping me sort out the way I think about my own life. And that just wouldn't happen if I didn't have access to these people, or if they didn't make themselves accessible, I guess. You know, Anthony Wilson was kind of a really interesting conversation. It actually wound up stretching out into a couple hours. We got into some really, really deep stuff, but he's, a Los Angeles based guitar player. His father was the famous musician Gerald Wilson. And, I was really struck by, he was just so willing to be vulnerable in our conversation. In fact, I don't know, maybe he's had some good therapy or something, but he's just willing to be vulnerable in general. Like he is a musician's musician, and he's got a lot of craft on his guitar, and arranging and writing big band and, orchestrations and whatnot. And then he decided he wanted to do this new album called Frogtown, where he just decided to sing again. And it was, I went to music school briefly when I was younger, and I remember I was paralyzed by the musicianship classes that required me to sing out loud because I was just terrified of my own voice or other people hearing it. And here was this guy who just decided that he was going to do it. He was just going to make his voice available for other people to hear. And he told really personal stories in his album through the songwriting. And that, I don't know, it was kind of inspiring to me. I'm not sure if I learned how to do it necessarily, but I really appreciated that he did it. And I was glad he would talk with me so openly. Again, it's another one of those guys I felt like I should have known years ago because of our somewhat common histories. But he was just such a lovely gent and so open. And the other thing that sort of blew me away is I think musicians a lot of time get a bad rap as sort of, being just artists and being out there. He was so articulate and had these fine-grained descriptions of what it was that he was trying to do. It really felt good to me to just get a chance to make it, well, I want to say visible, to make it audible for listeners out there, just how much thought goes into some of the work that these people do. It doesn't happen. Well, some of it happens by accident, but they do spend a lot of time thinking through what they do. And I don't know. I was happy to get a chance to uncover that a little bit. And the stuff when he started talking about his relationship with his father, if you all listen to episode 12, part 2, somewhere in there, we were almost completely unable to phrase questions and responses to each other because we were talking about deep stuff having to do with father-son relationships. But I just somehow, in all of that inability to communicate in all of that inability to phrase things correctly, I knew we were really communicating. The fact that we were stumbling so hard to get to it just helped me know that we were really talking about something real. And that's something I'm proud of. Actually, a lot of people who I interviewed, you hear things like and pausing, and you hear them rephrase their questions and their answers. And I'm proud of that because I feel like when you're talking about the really meaningful stuff, you don't often have a pat answer for what it should be. And I was really happy that these people who came on the show got a chance to formulate answers and the space to do it. It meant a lot to me to provide it for them, and they did not disappoint.
And it's such a lovely testimony to the things that these individuals have created and giving your listeners the insight right into their process, which you don't always necessarily see in, the introduction to a book or the acknowledgement sections or, in the liner notes of an album. Because people often have different feelings about something or the way they've made something or how they've engaged in a community to create something until later. And their feelings about it are different. And, if you went back, or fast forward, if we went, to season 20 of Make Moves and you revisited with some of these folks, they would be also in a very different place. So there's I think, wonderful quality of getting to hear from people in the moment how they feel about something, and then helping people understand why they're doing it a certain way or how they're making things happen for themselves. And it really encourages process in addition to whatever they creatively produce. And that demystifies the process. It makes it more open and understandable. And one of the other things that I really think about in relation to Make Moves is that you wanted to create a community of people. And some people do that, through pursuing, joining a softball team, or some people, join a religious group, or other people join a support group, or people, try to usually seek out established communities that they can then be a part of. But what you decided to do was say, you know what, I'm going to create my own of people I want to talk to, and then people I hope that will listen to these conversations.
Yeah. Part of that is maybe a defect on my part. I don't really feel like I belong in a lot of those other pre-formulated communities. I want to fit in. Sometimes I don't, or at least I don't feel like I do. And it was for me the freedom to just say, well, let's just build our own community, and we'll invite people that want to be here, and we'll know that everyone here is accepted because they want to be here. There's no pretense about how you get here. You just have to decide that you want to be a part of it. And I don't know. I think maybe I didn't explain that well, but it was important to me, and it's been a really lovely byproduct of my work on the podcast. I mean, now I'm actually friends with a lot of the people now who I got to interview because we've had real conversations, and it's been great. And listeners out there I've gotten to be friends with because people are sharing things. And on some level, I feel a little selfish. I get to be the center of a community in the sense that, that most days when you're not the host, I'm the host, and I get to distill everything down to my point of view. But there's so much exchange going both ways. I think it's been great, and the community has been it's been something that I think I've always wanted, and I couldn't find it elsewhere. So I just started to draw a circle big enough for everybody else to fit in.
Yeah. And, a lot of what happens, I think, in those prefab communities is that they're for people who are doing either extremely well or extremely poorly. They're not really somehow meant for people who are who are doing okay and just looking for connection in a more, kind of perhaps genuine or, I don't know, but I get what you mean in that I don't think I've ever really resonated in many of those established spaces. So it's great to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to make the move, and I'm going to establish a space that is for people who aren't maybe in those two polarized groups.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is I really don't want it to just be for me. I want the guests to get to know each other. These are all people that not all of them, but a lot of them are really out there at the end of a branch, very far out, doing their own thing. And there is a common thread that everyone on this who comes on this show is doing that, and they have that in common with other guests. And I guess I don't know. I'm hoping that they'll appreciate the chance to get to know each other as well and feel a community, to feel less alone in the risks that they're taking. And it doesn't mitigate the risks that they're taking, but at least they'll feel less alone in it.
I like that. Is that so? So it sounds a little bit, we've made it through all the guests and recapped some of the your favorite aspects of those interviews. And it sounds like you're starting to talk about some more of those global takeaways from your first season of Make Moves. Is there anything else you can tell us out in the listening world, what you want us to know about this first season and what you're thinking as you move forward with the podcast?
I don't have a really articulate answer to this, but I have learned a lot by doing this. I'm hoping that all of you listeners out there are learning something. I'm actually curious what you're learning. If you'd love to share it with me, please email me or post on some Facebook page somewhere and tell me about it. But, I think the big takeaways is that we aren't alone. We are all human. I mean, these sound like giant universals, but all the people who are out there taking risks and making moves and doing what they need to do, they have reasons, they have vulnerabilities and risks. They feel good when it goes well. They feel bad when it goes bad. I wanted to make sure that everyone in the audience knows that part of the big hope for this show is to really to humanize the people whose work we consume. And I've said this before, but as a culture, I really do feel like we consume creative work like it's cookies, but we don't really know much about the people behind it, and they are human. And I think one of the reasons that as a culture we have devalued art and music so much is because we don't really realize that there are humans behind this, and I think it's harder to devalue and ignore the creative arts when you have to acknowledge that it's humans like you and me that make it.
Right. No, I completely agree. And as someone who has been your friend for over a decade, I feel really privileged and excited to be part of this community, this movement, this making moves movement. And I'm so truly excited and happy for you that you've found a medium that allows you to connect with people and express your voice.
Well, yeah, I'm happy you're happy because on some level I feel compelled to do it anyway. But the fact that other people are appreciating it, I'm not gonna lie, it makes me feel good. It makes me feel a sense of purpose that maybe wasn't there before. So thanks to everyone, because outside, if all of you weren't out there, I'd be doing this alone. And that's not really that's not as lovely as being connected with a lot of people. So, I mean, okay, I'm going to blather on about this too long, so I'll switch gears a little bit. You did ask about season 2. I am lining up interviews and guests right now for season 2. It will probably be a dozen long episodes and maybe some shorter episodes interspersed in between. I am going to do a few different format changes. I am going to experiment a little bit with the way that I promote shows. I am going to do more around the community building part of this podcast because I think it's important, and it's actually one of the most endearing qualities of the podcast, I think. But I don't want to get lost in the technicalities of it because I really think the human part is the important part. But there are a lot more things coming. There will be a dozen more episodes and some shorter episodes as well. And there's going to be other ways to engage. I think I'll do some things like Facebook Live Q&A, so listeners can ask questions. I'd like to start a recurring listening lounge where I just listen to music on Facebook Live with other people, because it's fun to listen to music with other people. And, just ways for people to come together and appreciate creative accomplishments together.
That sounds fantastic. It's great to see that it's building on itself and that you're learning and doing new ways around Make Moves, and that we'll still get to tune in and listen to these awesome interviews for hopefully at least another 12 episodes and of course more. So John, are we wrapping up? Is that what we're doing now?
Yeah, I think I've said everything useful that I have to say. So at this point, you'll just be getting me repeating myself or less meaningful things. But I thank you so much for taking the time to ask me questions and take an interest and being prepared and it means a lot to me to have you involved because like you said, we've known each other a long time, and a lot of things in my life have not changed, and it's nice that you're out there as a witness to see some positive shifts with this show, and I'm really glad to have had the chance to talk with you.
Thanks, John. Thank you for inviting me to do this. This was great. I mean, in many ways, it's like many of the conversations that we have, but now we get to do it in support of Make Moves. So I'm thrilled. This was both exciting and somehow very natural at the same time. So thanks.
Cool. Well, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks, John. You're listening to Make Moves and with John and Laura, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody. All right, there you have it. Bonus episode number 13 is coming to a close. Big thanks to Laura for coming on and interviewing me. It was such a pleasure to have that conversation. A huge thanks to each guest that came on the show this season. I learned so much from every single one of you. You can't believe how much better my life is for having gone through this experience. It's been transformational for me. And listeners out there, thank you for doing what you do. Together, we are building a community in support of creative risk takers, and I think that is going to make this world a better place. I hope you'll stay engaged as I'm putting together season 2. You can swing by any of the social media platforms. Facebook and Instagram is where I'm mostly at. You can find us there at Make Moves with John. You can swing by the website anytime, makemoveswithjohn.com. You can find a blog post for each guest and each episode, learn about them, find some more information, hear about the music that gets featured. And also, you can email me anytime you want. I love getting feedback from all of you. It's really made this show better in a lot of ways. That's feedback@makemoveswithjohn.com. Okay, I hope you'll all be taking good care of yourselves. Go out there and make some moves.